This time, on An Architect's Perspective, I sit down with the architect and designer Eva Jiřičná inside Villa Tugendhat, one of modernism's most iconic houses. We explore the villa's design, its history, the role of Lily Reich, and why this house remains one of the most influential works of modern architecture. Let's take a listen. So Eva, thank you very much for joining us here today.
Welcome.
We're here in the Czech Republic in the Villa Tugendhat designed by Mies van der Rohe. Before we speak more about this villa, would you mind just telling us a little bit more about yourself?
I was born not very far from here. I mean, if you go north from Brno, you would hit the town called Zlín, which was the only modern town built between two world wars. And this is where I was born on the outset of the Second World War. After the war, I lived in the town, which was the only modern town built between the Second World War. In the meantime comes February 1948 and the communists take over. During the time I studied and went to school, and the family somehow, managed to survive. And I started playing with every single possible subject until my colleague said, "Why don't you study architecture?" And my dear father, who was an architect, just said to me, "Don't study architecture because you will become an architect's wife and you will never achieve anything in life." Then everybody else kept saying, "Architecture for a woman? Women never understand the structure. They can never understand structure engineering." So hence I decided that I was going to prove that I could. So probably the worst possible approach to something which you want to do for the rest of your life. But now, in my case, I was very lucky because I fell in love with architecture the first day I entered the Faculty of Architecture.
I think one of the first major projects, was Brighton Harbour. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about how you got to that point in your career.
It comes to Prague Spring. And at Prague Spring, I'm working with a colleague whose wife started a branch of the Society for Human Rights in Prague. So, of course, I signed in without really knowing what it was. And then there was a Congress of Architects in 1967, and I met an English architect who was a deputy architect of the Greater London Council. And he suggests that he could organize an exchange visit between an English architect and the Czech architect. So I would work for a year in GLC and the British architect would work in Prague at my place. I couldn't get a permission to leave because I was a suspect.
So your passport was taken?
But not at that point.
Wow.
They eventually, after a year, allowed me to travel to London. I came to London on the 1st of August, 1968. The invasion took place on the 21st of August, 1968. And shortly after, the Czech embassy in London wrote to me that my passport was abolished and my permission to work outside the country was no longer valid, and the return to my country was no longer required. That is how it was formulated.
Required.
Consequently, my mother was called to attend the court hearing when they sentenced me to 3 years of imprisonment in my absence if I returned back for illegal departure from the country. So there was no logic in it. So when I came to London, I started working for Greater London Council.
And this is a government-run architect's office.
That is a government-run architect's office. Then there was not enough work, so we were told, sit here and pretend you are busy. And that is what I could not do. And I was doing everything possible to find a new job. And that new job was offered to me by a partner of a very big firm called Louis de Soissons, just got the project of designing the harbour in Brighton. And I thought it was fascinating.
But I understand Uvarp was involved and he would come and visit you on a monthly basis. Was that so?
So my first site meeting was in Brighton on the beach. And over would be a part of it with some of his engineers. They would be the main contractor. There were about 60 people sitting in those side huts, so talking about how we build the harbour. It was not only building the breakwaters, but also the access through the viaduct from the top of the cliff. There was 1,400 flats to be built in order to make it commercially viable. And my first job was, first of all, now we will laugh, but my first job was to draw a perspective of what it's going to look like when it's done. Because everybody wanted to see, I had
vision.
Never seen the sea properly, except the one in Bulgaria, which has got no tidal difference. And eventually produced a drawing, which, to my greatest surprise, the partner who was in charge loved. And then, of course, it started developing, and then it became a real collaboration with not only overlapping partners, the structure engineers, but also with the specialists on sea. It had to be accessible. It had to be used in future by the fishermen. It had to be used by people. It had to be safe. And when you started designing the viaduct, so we had to design the lighting, we had to design the shape of the columns, we had to design the detail. So that was the project on which I spent 10 years working.
So Eva, that project came to an end eventually, and you spent some time working with Richard Rogers. Maybe you could talk a bit about that.
At the end of the project, which was in 1918, there was a recession. And everybody assumed, because I was an associate of this big firm, that I would be far too expensive to be employed. And at that point, Joseph, a little Moroccan guy who came to London to become an architect, he became a hairdresser, and from the hairdresser, he just went on selling French fashion in London. So he asked the most famous architects of that time to design his shop, which happened to be on the corner of Sloane Street and Basil Street. Mm-hmm. And Norman Foster, of course, had a big office, so he gave the job to two people, and one of them was Jan Kaplitzky, who was my partner at the time. And so I was invited indirectly to the opening. And at the opening, I met Joseph's wife, who asked me to help them with the interior of their little flat. And that was the time, when everything was published in Interior magazine, Vogue magazine, Bazaar. So when I tried to design this Joseph's flat, to my absolute shock and surprise, Joseph's flat was published in every single London or English or foreign magazines I have. And consequently, I got the label, she is an interior designer. She can do interiors, which I really had no knowledge to speak of. And apart from leading a flat, he also started doing little shops. And somehow he gained a confidence in me. So I started doing all those little shops. And at that point, I designed one of the shops for Joseph, which was an interior of the shop for Kenzo in Sloane Street. Richard Rogers and Norman Foster were walking down Sloane Street, walked into the shop. And because now Kenzo wanted the shop to be in wood, which I never used before in my life, so Richard walked in and he said, "Who did this shop?" So when I said that I did, so he said, "You have to come and work on Lloyd's because they want interiors on wood. And we, as a firm, we don't know how to use wood." So I became an expert on wood. Right. And joined Richard Rogers' office on Lloyd's building for 2.5 years.
Wow, fantastic. All of this publicity you talk about, was that one of the reasons why you got a call from Steve Jobs?
It was much later, and I started doing glass staircases, which was initially developed for Joseph in order to get the light into the basement, because the rent for basement shopping in the area was much cheaper than the ground floor. So all those retailers wanted to save money and get people down to the basement, but people don't like going down into a black hole. So on a job which we did in Sloane Street, Joseph kept saying, do something to make people come to the basement, because the basement was big. And he just didn't want to lose money on the basement. So I just came to the idea that if we do the glass staircase, so we bring that daylight through the glass into the basement. We did the first staircase. And
the first glass staircase?
That is, yes.
Which so many of the Apple staircases now, their DNA almost comes from this staircase. Maybe you could just talk a bit about that then.
So when Steve Jobs mentioned that he wanted a glass staircase in the new shop, so suddenly I had a telephone call. Could I fly to Silicon Valley to meet Steve Jobs? And now he wanted to do the best glass staircase, but he wanted to combine the glass staircase with the context of Gap shops, which are woody, simple, cheap, and sell cheap fashion. And so we spent some time debating it, and he wanted a completely unrealistic dream to do 300 shops in 1 year. That was the first thing which he told me when we met. And when I said it was impossible, so because not only from the production point of view, but also from the legal point of view, how long it takes before you sort out the lease and the legal issues, of hiring shops, your responsibility, the timing, and so on. And so he said, if I say so, I will. And so it took him 3.5 years before he opened the first shop. But I recommended him to the structure engineer who that time had an office in America, Tim McFarlane. And now I just thought, well, if you only want the glass staircase, so why don't you ask Tim McFarlane? This is why the first staircases looked so much like the staircases which we had done in the past.
So Eva, we've spoken a bit about your career and your early life and your achievements. Maybe we could talk a little bit about this particular villa.
I'd love to.
And the inspiration that it's given to you over the years. Maybe if we could wind back to how you first came across this villa.
When I got into the second year of architecture, one of my professors talked to us in the lessons on history of architecture about modernism, which was a forbidden subject because modernism was not allowed to be taught in schools of architecture during the communist regime.
Wow.
So
it was all classical, was it?
Yes, it was. Well, it was up to Baroque, Art Nouveau, and then it was socialist realism. One of the professors had the courage to say that he worked for one of the architects who was the architect of Zlín, the town where I was born, and who actually worked Corbusier, and who also worked on Villa Tugendhat. But he told us about this magnificent house which was built in Brno. So a group of students, in my year, decided to come to Brno and look at the house. We found it.
What year was that, roughly?
I would have thought it would have been like 58.
Okay. At this stage, was the house part of the state, owned by the state?
Yes, because the state was all nationalized.
Yeah.
I mean, all private properties were nationalized. Tugendhat's family lived in Venezuela.
Right.
And at that point, they moved from Switzerland to Venezuela. So we saw the house. I think we were allowed to go to the garden. And we saw the outside of the house. But the inside, it really didn't look like anything what we are looking at today.
So, Eva, we've had an incredible day here, but maybe you could help us for the people that haven't had chance to visit Villa Tugendhat or even heard about it. Could you describe what the experience is like walking in off the street and then into the house?
See it if you walk along the street and when you look at the houses, so you find out that you are in a part of the town where rich people lived, probably before the war, if you recognize a little bit architectural styles. And suddenly you come to a very modern single story, interesting happening, which you don't know. Is it a house? Is it a pavilion? Is it an entrance to the garden? It could be anything. It is completely, totally secret in what it hides behind it. It's a very beautiful object. It has got a glass curved wall. It has got a little open patio. You can see the quality of the fencing, of the design. And then you suddenly walk through and you are led to one of the most magnificent experiences of being inside an interior which is simple, extremely architecturally controlled in every single detail, in the quality of materials and in the quality of proportion and the space, which in that interior continues into the external open space, which is the garden. So there is no visible division between the inside and the outside.
Eva, one thing we're trying to get to the bottom of with this show is the understanding of the evolution of modernism from the outset. And we were just interested to know if you could help us understand through your own words and your own experience what you believe the international style of architecture was. Could you help unpack that, please?
Initially, it was based on the idea of creating a healthy environment, healthy living, healthy body. Out of that became a concept of an open space, concept of getting rid of all the decoration and just of following the function as the leading element, so the form follows the function. So you just had to justify that any decoration or anything which is not absolutely necessary is not interfering with the basic concept which makes my life healthy, simple. There was, of course, the philosophy also of creating the world where everybody would have its role. So it was really breaking the barriers between the rich and the poor. This house does not change.
But society was changing, music was changing, literature was changing, and architecture was changing. And this is a good example.
Everything was changing, but that is something which happens after all those major conflicts. It happened after the First World War.
So even the First World War ended, and maybe you could just describe how the international style was a response to that.
Before the war started, you just had the development of the society, which was controlled by people who made money, who made fortune, and who surrounded themselves with the massive, rich show of something which they could afford. So, so the interiors before the Second World War, they are kind of unhealthy places with the windows covered with heavy curtains. And suddenly the end of the war just comes in. And now there is this young generation and new generation of people who say, we have to change the life, we have to change the world, we have to start living healthy, we have to exercise, we have to swim, we have to dress up differently, we have to change our cultural perception of what is good and what is bad.
No, it's interesting because in some of our previous shows we've looked at the fall of the British Empire in India and how Lutyens was sort of moved away, and Nehru, the Prime Minister at the time, had this pan-Indian style where he dreamt of a new architecture to reflect the new country and commissioned people like Charles Correa, B.V. Doshi, who won the Pritzker Prize, Charles Correa.
Yes, of course.
And that is the sign of a new modern country in a way, rethinking its architecture. And to a certain extent, there's some parallels here with the fall of the Habsburg.
I think that it is, because I think that Doshi and Charles Correa, they were all people who were interested in the human nature of the society and the humanities. And I would certainly agree, because the difference, between what was during the Habsburgs, we are now working on a conversion of a castle which was built and belonged to Habsburgs, and the richness, and the comfort and the excessive wealth, which you had to show, because you had to show you were rich, you had to show, everything what you had, put it now on the pedestal and having it admired. But this modernism, it is one of the richest family probably in the town of Brno. And yes, it is expensive, but it is not kind of ostentatiously visible. It is just due to the beauty of the design, the selection of material, and it is a healthy house. You have got a light which penetrates.
And I think this is something that Mies took to America, and his clients learned from, in a way, the Farnsworth and so on and so forth. So I think that notion, that idea, was exported as well to America. So all of that is sort of traced back through the Habsburgs in a way. That's fascinating. So Eva, the house was built for a wealthy couple, Greta and Fritz Tugendhat, and it was built just a decade before the war broke out. At the time, Mies was criticised almost for spending so much time on a house for such a privileged couple, or such a wealthy couple, at a time when other architects like Le Corbusier was focused on mass housing, mass social affordable housing. Have you got any insight or thought about that?
Maybe I can just say the following. So yes, Corbusier did work on social housing, but he also did Villa Savoie for a very rich couple. So when he did exactly the same what Mies has done for this villa, he went into every single detail. He did not try to save money. Yes, he went over the budget and came back, redesigned it, and then he finished with much more than the stage when they decided to save money. To build a house for a client where you can actually practice all your skills, because if you work with one client who has got sufficient financial funds to pay for the design, so you can take your design much further. How many architects got actually educated and familiar with the approach to design following Mies's design of Villa Tugendhat? You need money to be able to experiment. Nobody who is designing a housing scheme, who is doing, cheap things like, even Weisenhof. So there is no money to spend on experimentation, because you can't actually go wrong, because there is nobody to pay for anybody's mistake. So yes, I don't think it. Mies had a great deal of interest in helping the poor. Let's admit, I don't think that he was one of those guys. On the other hand, lots of architects who are now designing the windows and window frames and lighting of the interiors of the social housing are inspired by his approach.
Yeah, after decades of neglect, Villa Tugendhat underwent a major restoration. Do you approve of the restoration? Was it carried out with sensitivity and integrity?
I think that they have done everything what they possibly could with the knowledge of the technologies used, and also with the ability of the skill and materials still making it possible to restore to its original glory. And I think that now, when there are any minor questions left, that is the nature of the beast. You cannot achieve any perfection of this kind. I think they have done a fantastic job.
Yeah.
And I think that now it gives me an impression that it's going to last for a very long time. So it will actually communicate the ideas of how the house was conceived, how the house was being used, and what it means in the history of architecture, and its role for the future, and its role which it represented in the past for the future generation.
Yes. Well, Eva, we're sitting here in this wonderfully restored villa. Maybe you could just summarize your thoughts about how this villa now fits into the narrative of modern architecture today.
Having been in the villa so many times, so every time I come, I just have made a new experience. With my advancing age, I suddenly not only feel what you can look at, but I also feel how the architect was struggling with the design of the house. I can feel behind it the tension, the sleepless nights, the necessity to resolve the problems, so this kind of obsession, I want the windows to disappear. How do I do it? Where do I find somebody who is going to help me do it? It's a book which you will never stop reading and which you will always go back to for future inspiration, for the correction of your previous thoughts, and for the admiration of this devotion to the profession which he chose and to fall in love with.
But one of the facts that people talk about is arguably Mies's golden years was before he left to go to America, in part because of the partnership he had. We now refer it to as almost a partnership with Lily Reich, the lady who was very influential to Mies and was responsible for many parts of the furniture design, the fabric, and whom hasn't been credited over the years in the way that we would now do that. Maybe you could talk a bit about your knowledge of her influence and the importance of giving credit to the people that are due the credit.
From my experience, whatever people think, there is a difference between women's approach to design, comfort, proportions, and the well-being. And from my long experience of working with both sexes, so the collaboration of those two is always the best because you get the goodies from both sides. And if you have a respect one for another, so you can achieve and you can break the barriers because one side actually opens up your eyes for the other side is closed to, and vice versa. On the other hand, I think that in this particular case, I wonder whether it would be somehow related back to what my father said to me, don't become an architect because you will only become an architect's wife. Doesn't mean that you would have to marry somebody, but you would always be taken as the collaborator and an important part of the male architect's creative process. Because that was the situation which I think it existed not only in architectural profession, it existed in music, it existed in art, it existed in practically all the avenues of professional life, art, law, medicine. And what you mentioned, the role of a woman in the world up to the as a matter of fact, up to the present time, has been constantly going through changes. And if Mies apparently did not sufficiently refer to his obviously admired collaborator, so, and I think that he refers, he gives her credits at few occasions, if I read carefully what the various art critics so say, but he never say we did it together. He does not actually put her name on the name of people who participated on the house. I think that it was actually found out by the historians that she actually contributed.
But you have mentioned that was common not just for Mies, Alvar-Aalto, for instance, and his wife. So it was the times we were living in at that moment. It doesn't make it right, but that was very common. But you think in practice today, we're in a very different place, hopefully?
James, I sit on so many juries of competitions, and the role of the woman, or promoting emerging women architects, promoting, just of generally speaking, women's work, women's participation in the design in any profession, is still moving very slowly ahead. It has not reached the goal when you would not have people who would say, like some of my clients who said to me they didn't want to work with a woman in my office. It still happens. On the other hand, in the industry, because architects' role is to build and women have to go to a building site. Taking orders from a woman on a building site is still a problem. But, the difference between me studying as a female student between 1956 and 1962 and women studying at School of Architecture now, it is no comparison, because now women are actually, most of the time, better students. They work hard and they are more responsible in those young years. And also the competence of those women to start their own offices, to achieve their goals, to fight for their ideas, to fight for their conviction. It is definitely changing. Every year there is a progress. But we are still not, on that level when men and women are judged and worked exactly the same.
So still a lot of work to do in the profession.
Still work to do.
Yeah. Final question. Mies said God is in the detail. Maybe you could help us understand what you think Mies meant by that.
What a difficult task. I totally believe that God is in details. If you believe in God, if you believed in intuition, if you believe in any spirit, understanding of the problem, how can you actually manifest that it's true? It is just of practicality and the experience of being in this house and looking at the edge. Look at the detail, how these two different veneers, one of them is going this way, one of them is going that way, and how they meet. Look at the perfection of this joint. Can you imagine what is happening underneath? He had to think about it, and he had to work with the carpenter or whoever made the table in order to resolve the necessity for him to have this precise right angle. When you look at the door handle, and he used Walter Gropius's door handle. But there is a little door handle on the door leading from the garden to the children's bedroom. He probably designed it himself because it is done for the children's little hand. It's a little loop, so that is the function of the door handle. But it's also the aesthetics of it, the quality of the material. And the design which meets the human body, that there is this kind of sensuality, of touching, your hands, your eyes.
Experience.
Architecture, and I always keep saying that architecture is a visual profession which make you understand things on the visual basis. But you also have the touch, and all those materials, you have got the visual aspect of that wall behind you with the shelving and the books, but also sitting at this table. I have my hands on the table. I touched the dining table when we were standing there. I sat in that chair when you have got, and the chair designed, so for how he put the leather on the cold metal. Only at the part when you touch it, the rest of it is his visual appearance, because he doesn't want to make the chair look heavy. So he looks between the sheen and matte, and he looks at the comfort of you are touching something which you like touching, which has got the same temperature like the leather. And then you have got something which gives you the pleasure of and cooling down.
This is the contrast between the furniture,
contrast.
the structure.
So it works, on all the levels. The visual kind of learning or perception of the design. On the other hand, it is something which is designed and on a basis of perfect understanding of the ergonomics of human body, something which gives you the comfort. And he is a master of combining the material, combining matte and sheen, having reflection and having no reflection, translucency and clarity of see-through. It's working with the perspective, the distances, and just of somehow making you subconsciously understand what is a bearing construction detail and what is this kind of dividing element between your feet and above your head, what kind of defines the space.
Well, Eva, that's a fantastic place to say thank you so much for sharing your thoughts of this villa, but not just the thoughts of the villa, but setting the context of the history of this country in relation to the villa. It's been absolutely illuminating. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, because I had a chance of revisiting the house, which I've always admired, and the architects who I cannot associate with his approach to design, but I've got a fantastic admiration. And I'm very thankful to him for having learned so much from what he had done. So I'm one of those people who will definitely carry on his flag and obsession for architectural detail.
Eva, before we go, we know you're running a very big office here in the Czech Republic. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about where people could find out about more of your work and how they would get in touch.
The firm which I'm an associate partner of is called AI Design, meaning architecture interiors. We are based in Prague, and we work on lots of projects at the moment, starting from the conversion of historic castle, going through the conversion of the communist buildings, which no longer fulfill their function, going to the new development, private housing or offices, and housing. And we are, thanks God, at the moment, very busy. So how long I can carry on, I don't know. But I'm still enjoying every single day.
We're looking forward to seeing what the years bring in terms of your architecture. So thank you, Eva.
Thank you, James.
Next time on An Architect's Perspective, I'm visiting Villa E1027, the house Eileen Gray and John Badovici designed in the south of France between 1926 and 1929, and a landmark of sensual modernism. I tour the house with Professor Tim Benton and Dr. Carmen Espagel, two of the world's leading experts on Eileen Gray. The full video will be on YouTube if you'd like to watch, or if you prefer to listen, just search for An Architect's Perspective wherever you get your podcasts.